Good morning and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in just about under 20 minutes, more or less.
We've got big clocks running to make sure we don't yak on too much and take up too much of your time. Remember, you can listen on 1.5 speed if you think that we could talk even faster. Hello there, it's Thursday, the 12th of September. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News, and peering across the screen is, from another bit of South East London, Jack Blanchard of Politico.
And just like every weekday, we get up when it is dark, we look through all the papers, we read through all the emails and press releases, we start texting people at goodness knows what hours, and we get ready to tee you up for the day ahead in British politics, get you going before your day begins.
By drinking industrial amounts of coffee, as well as annoying people before they've woken up. How much coffee are you on right now, Jack?
It's definitely increasing. When I started doing London Playbook, which is, as you know, a morning email service we do and involves staying up most of the night writing about what's happening tomorrow, I bought this coffee machine that brilliantly has a timer on it so that you can set it up and it kicks in at exactly the moment. So I've got it set up at the same time as my alarm clock, and I walk or stagger, honestly, downstairs with sort of creaking back and crying into my pyjamas. And there it is, already producing frothing coffee, and you sort of stagger over to the machine and start drinking it very quickly. It's not a healthy way to start the day, but it is kind of fun.
Well, it's hard to tell. I've got a coffee machine and I have double coffees, and this coffee is my third cup, so it's actually my fifth and sixth espresso of the morning, which might sound a lot. I'll probably have another 2 to 4 after this podcast.
You're kidding.
It's going to kill me one day, but
terrible.
Everyone's welcome to the funeral. So enjoy this podcast while it lasts. Anyway, it is the last day of recess before the Commons rises for the conference season. So those MPs who haven't already will be heading back to their constituencies today. For it is party conference season. Lib Dems first from Saturday, then Labour, then Tories, meaning that every MP effectively, and I hate me saying this, does 1 week's visible work. Where we see them at party conference, they might say that they're working very hard the rest of the time, but, you know, where are the receipts? But we don't stop. We will be there for all three, starting with Lib Dems. It's going to be the Mercure Hotel from Sunday night.
That is very generous, calling going to party conference a week's work. Have you seen what these MPs do at this conference? They wander around with warm glasses of white wine in their hand, jabbering to each other and plotting, and they occasionally sit on a panel and talk about their hobby horse issue, and then they go back to the bar. It's a nice work if you can get it, but it's not exactly grafting for your constituents, is it?
2 MPs that I've talked to in the last few days have talked about how they used to be like advisors or have official roles at conference, and their diaries would be completely packed when they weren't MPs, but now they are MPs. It is a few breakfasts and then drinks parties in the evening and wandering around and schmoozing. I mean, nice work if you can get it. Right, let's get on with the day. What are the 3 things that we're talking about today?
Oh yeah, actual news. Good point. There is a big day of news as well. And the number one issue, the really big number one issue today that Keir Starmer is going to be talking about, and therefore we're all going to be talking about, is the NHS. They are publishing this morning the report, the Darzi report, a report by an eminent surgeon, Ara Darzi, on the state of the NHS. And it is grim reading. We'll be getting into that. Keir Starmer will be making a speech on that this morning. We're going to talk about the budget, which is now less than 7 weeks away. The head of the CBI is making a speech tonight where they will say that, frankly, the doom and gloom from Keir Starmer has gone too far and it may be actually affecting investment into the UK. That is definitely not the message that Keir Starmer wanted to get out. And then we're going to be talking about Britain and America and Ukraine again, because tonight Keir Starmer, because the man never stops, heads off to America. He is going to Washington this evening ahead of a meeting with Joe Biden tomorrow, and Ukraine is going to be items number 1, 2 and 3 on the agenda for that summit. So we better get into that as well. Let's start with the NHS though, Sam, because this story is on the front page of pretty much every newspaper today. It is another key plank in Labour's big mission of this year and this autumn, which is to convince people or show people or prove to people, depending on your point of view, just how bad the state of the nation that they have inherited is. We've heard it on the state of the public finances. We've seen it very visibly with the state of the prisons, and now these prisoners, cheering, champagne cork popping prisoners being allowed out onto the streets because there's no room for them in our prisons. And now we're going to be talking about the state of the NHS and this big report by Lord Darzi, 159 pages of misery about just how bad a state the NHS is in.
This is a report that Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, commissioned in the days after coming into office. This is, as it were, the diagnosis. There's another stage of this process next spring when Wes Streeting comes up with what's called a 10-year plan, which effectively is the answers to lots of the questions that are posed today. But we get a strong steer of where Labour is going to take the NHS and the political arguments around the NHS. And at its core, what this report argues is that the NHS is doing less work for more money, and that's unsustainable. And there's a blizzard of statistics on longer waiting lists, fewer treatments, less efficient use of hospitals, the fact that actually surgeons are doing less operations now because there are fewer scanners and fewer operating theatres, and this has to change. But the question is, how are they going to change it, and what are they going to do?
Exactly. I mean, it reads like, and is meant to read like, a very, very damning indictment of the last 14 years of Conservative-led government. Some of the stats in there, Sam, for example, no progress whatsoever made in early cancer diagnosis over the whole period, 14,000 extra deaths a year from long waiting lists. You know, these were all things the Conservatives used to talk about, better cancer treatment, and that, you remember David Cameron's Cancer Drugs Fund was going to transform cancer treatment through the 2010s. Obviously it didn't happen. The Conservatives used to talk about making it a more high-tech NHS, a more efficient NHS, a more productive NHS. None of those things have happened, according to this report. And the NHS, the Conservatives used to talk about protecting the NHS budget, even as they were cutting back on so many other aspects of public spending. And yet here we are with a report which says that our NHS is lagging well behind so many other nations around the world. As you say, what do you do about it? And that is not what Lord Darzi's job has been to do, is to diagnose that. Sorry, we're going to have to stop those medical puns, aren't we? But there we go. Sorry, that's the only one, I promise. The idea is that Keir Starmer is laying the ground here today for something quite radical in the way the NHS is set up. And the reforms, we don't know what's coming yet, but are expected to be quite technical in terms of the way things work. But they really need to transform the level of service available to people without the huge cash injection that obviously lots of people in the NHS would like to see, because Keir Starmer says the money is just not there.
But this isn't a podcast about the NHS. This is a podcast about politics. And it strikes me that this report is an attempt to shift the political debate in a number of kind of key ways and send a number of political messages as much as all the red ink from all the horrible findings are designed to shock. The first thing that this report tries to tell the public, this is an 8-year project. Okay, funnily enough, Jack, that means that Labour needs to be re-elected again in 2028 in order to complete it. That will be no accident. Secondly, you have to look at the way that the report, and in particular Keir Starmer's early response to the report, talks about new money. You say, quite rightly, no cash injection, and funding is tight. But you look at Keir Starmer's response, and he says that we can't raid working people's taxes in order to fund the NHS overhaul. But that doesn't preclude there needing to be an overall budget rise for the NHS, because the point of this report is to call for reform, and upfront reform costs money. And that's the bit of the debate that Labour have never really allowed for in the way that they've talked about the NHS. But upfront reform does need money. But it's trying to change the debate around social care as well. One of the most striking figures, it says, is that 13% of NHS beds, that's more than 1 in 10, are simply being taken up by people with nowhere to go because the social care system is fixed. And again, you're seeing Labour trying to change the debate around social care. No longer is it that Tory idea that you fix social care in order to save the middle class's inheritance. Fixing social care is now all about saving the NHS. So that's a big shift. And also what Lord Darzi does is put a number of very difficult, unpalatable choices, not just about money, but elsewhere, at the door of this government. For instance, Could there be a sugar tax to improve public health? Not something that Wes Streeting's terribly keen on, but that seems to be back on the table. And do the arguments, for instance, banning smoking outside pubs because of the public health benefits outweigh the hit to growth, the arguments of the damage that would do to the hospitality sector, but overall that means less money being spent on treatment because of because of the effects of smoking. All of these things, you can have as much red ink and as much doom and gloom as you want, but the binary choices that flow from this are difficult, so no wonder the government are taking 3 or 4 more months before they work out what to say.
The overall message that people will hear today, Sam, is going to be a familiar one that they've heard from this government over the last 2 months, and that is Britain is in a terrible state. And if we move very smoothly on to the speech that we're going to hear tonight from the head of the CBI, Rain Newton-Smith, the point that the business leaders are making is that all the misery that we've heard from Keir Starmer so far, or he would say realism, but that the constant drumbeat from this government that this is in a terrible state, that is in a terrible state, now the NHS is in a terrible state, is not good for a country that is desperately trying to attract some investment into the nation, given the state of the public finances, given how little investment we've had over recent years. It's not a good message, and this is something you hear from Labour MPs as well. It's not often that grumbling backbench left-wing Labour MPs are in lockstep with the CBI, but here we are. There is a growing chorus of voices that suggest Keir Starmer is not getting the tone exactly right so far in the way that he is presenting himself. And I have to say, Sam, it's sort of reflected in the polls as well. I mean, I don't know how much polling should ever really matter 2 months after a general election, but it is pretty extraordinary if you look at the popularity ratings of this government, just how quickly they have collapsed. They come in with an enormous landslide, and normally you're sort of sailing in on a crest of a wave. Certainly that's what Tony Blair did when he won his landslide. He was very, very popular for a very long time. Keir Starmer's ratings are through the floor already. Now, we're obviously a long time out from another general election, so maybe that doesn't matter, but it will certainly be giving some Labour MPs, particularly those in marginal seats, the willies, to see that already their government is deeply unpopular out in the country.
That's right. And this argument is fascinating, is actually, I was talking to some Labour figures, really unnerving people. If you just unpick it, one of the great historical tensions in the Labour Party has been between fiscal discipline on the one hand and growth on the other, because as much as the government wants to pretend that they're two sides of the same coin, they're not. And in the end, Rachel Reeves has been signalling all this week that fiscal discipline, sorting out the public finances, making cuts in order to improve things in the future is the priority. But is that coming at the expense of growth? And that's kind of the argument that the CBI are making. Don't focus on that, focus on growth. And the question is the budget on October the 30th going to make things better or worse? Because I know, as we've talked about in this podcast before, the thing that the Treasury want to do to fill the so-called 22 billion back hole is get rid of some of the capital projects, funding for growth projects, in order to fill that black hole. But isn't that going to mean a hit to growth? I just want to circle back to the NHS, because the question is, isn't that problem actually alive and acute in the NHS today? I just want to read you something that Wes Streeting said at the weekend. And remember, capital budgets, the ones that fund, hospitals and development, right? Wes Streeting said at the weekend, capital and tech budgets have been raided year after year because revenue is out of control, i.e., day-to-day spending. I'm pretty sure that we're going to be raiding some of the capital and tech budgets to fill the in-year hole this year, right? Let me just translate. Wes Streeting is saying, despite all of the red ink in the Darzi report, saying this week we're going to cut bits of the investment budget for the NHS, the kind of long-term reform budget, because we've got a black hole in our finances. How does any of that square with the kind of things that you need to see in order to fix the NHS? How does the short-term goal of this budget cycle that Rachel Reeves is in charge of really allow this government to do the kind of big picture long-term reform that they talk about? And I put it to you that there are some people in the Labour Party that don't think you are, and that they are getting tied up in knots with fiscal discipline when growth and sorting out big problems should be the priority. And that's the dilemma at the heart of the Labour Party at the moment.
Yeah, and there's lots of other stories kicking around today about the budget and about other measures that Rachel Reeves might take. And I have to say, none of them look terribly popular. So if you're a party that is starting to worry about its popularity ratings and its misery messaging, then doing things like scrapping the single person council tax discount, which something that Labour is not ruling out, although I'd be amazed if they actually did it, is only going to annoy a load more people. And you have this risk in the budget if you keep doing these 8 different things, you annoy 8 different groups of people, from pensioners to single people and goodness knows whoever else hits, and collectively you get a big clamour of people who are suddenly very angry with the government. Just ask George Osborne about it. He did this in 2012 and it backfired on him pretty catastrophically. So we'll be talking plenty more about the budget over the next 6 or 7 weeks. And before we do, let's talk about foreign affairs, because we're going to run out of time. And Keir Starmer is got a big evening ahead of him. He is flying off to Washington tonight. He will be meeting Joe Biden tomorrow in the White House. We were expecting he'd see Kamala Harris, the vice president, as well. He'd obviously be keen to say hi to her, given she's got at least half a chance of being the next president, but it sounds like that's not going to happen. But this flurry of diplomacy that we've seen, Sam, at the start of the week, we were sort of speculating why suddenly there were all these UK-US talks happening this week. We've obviously had Anthony Blinken in town, and he went to Kyiv yesterday with David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary. The answer appears to be that they are finalising a plan to finally give Ukraine the power to shoot long-range missiles. It has not been confirmed yet, but we know for a fact that that's what Lammy and Blinken have been talking about this week. They went to Kyiv yesterday and talked to the new Ukrainian foreign minister about it, and they said in plain terms that our bosses will be talking about this in Washington on Friday. It's pretty clear, and we have reporting coming out of the US now saying as well that this plan is being finalised. It looks pretty certain it's going to go ahead. Not this week, but in the next few weeks, maybe at the UN General Assembly, and that is going to be a big moment for Ukraine as they try to, win back some sort of momentum on the battlefield.
This morning, David Lammy is coming back, I think, on the train from Kyiv, and basically he's making 2 arguments in favour of the shift. They're not confirming that they'll do this, but they are making the case before they make the announcement. The first is there was this huge shipment of missiles from Iran, tens of thousands of missiles from Iran that have been given to Russia that could strike deeper into Ukraine, which could change the balance. And so what that allows David Lammy and Anthony Blinken to argue is that Russia is the one doing the escalating, both in where they're targeting and how they're targeting. And this all clears the ground for a change of position to allow the longer range use of missiles. As you say, probably when President Zelensky meets President Biden in the margins of the UN General Assembly in a week or so, UNGA actually starting today. That's the backdrop to the visit. I think it's interesting. I think US officials have been going around London this week actually saying they really quite like engaging with this government for all of the complications around the Israel sanctions decision that Keir Starmer's government took last week. They see the UK's engagement with Europe as a big improvement on how the last government operated. So the mood music is great. So expect all smiles when Keir Starmer lands for this absolutely briefest of brief trips to the White House tomorrow. Most of it happening after most people are not paying any attention tomorrow night in the news cycle. But it will be a big moment for Keir Starmer, and he'll get a very warm reception in the White House.
It certainly will, as you say, a brief trip, but I think that just shows how important it is. They're planning to try not to do any press around it. They're not planning to do a press conference, but the fact that Keir Starmer has decided to fly over there for a 2-hour meeting with Joe Biden and fly straight back again behind closed doors, not any attempt to make any PR out of it, just shows that what they're talking about is really, really important. The way it's being framed in the US is it's not about different types of missiles, it's about, quote, expanding the range of Russia where Ukraine can attack, and that, as I say, is designed to push back the weaponry that Russia can use against Ukraine. That's probably enough, Sam. Just looking ahead to the weekend.
As Keir Starmer lands back in the UK after visiting the White House, Liberal Democrats will be gathering in Brighton for Liberal Democrat conference. It's all glamour. It's all glamour.
And I take it you'll be off to the Lib Dems, will you? When we speak on Monday morning, you're going to be in a hotel room in Brighton, slightly hungover and miserable after a night at the Lib Dem Glee Club or whatever you do there.
I'll be delighted to see you in the Mercure on top form as you would expect.
Oh, I'm not going. Sorry, Sam. I'm just going to be at home. My goodness, no Lib Demming for me. I'll see you at Labour, I suspect. All right, that's probably enough. Thanks very much, everyone, for listening. We will see you on Monday morning for some Lib Dem action. What a treat.
See you then. Bye-bye.